Well, welcome back. It's 4 o'clock sharp, Central Eastern Summer Time. So we continue our summer seminar today on research integrity. I'm very grateful to announce the next speaker. I have a conflict of interest because I am the proud supervisor of Tamarinde Haven, who is the next speaker. She will talk about responsible research climate, a study that we conducted in Amsterdam. She has a master's degree in psychology and philosophy. She has a cum laude PhD defense at the VU University, recently graduated in January of this year. She now is a postdoctoral researcher at the Quest Center in Berlin. She has studied research climate, but she also knows a lot about pre-registration. She knows a lot about supervision. She is, apart from that, she's also is a great and very inspirational teacher on research integrity for for different disciplines. And apart from that, she's also apart from research, she's also a teacher in modern dance. That's not something that we're going to discuss today. Today we're going to focus on the ARCA study that has studied responsible research climate. Tamarinde, happy to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So as Yuri already alluded to, today and this afternoon, in between a wonderful panel that's hopefully coming up, it's up to me to tell you a little bit about how we learned from academic researchers in Amsterdam what a responsible research climate could look like. And I hope that will give all of us plenty of suggestions for an engaging discussion on how we can create that throughout research. So I'll start with a little bit of background where I also define what I mean when I talk about a research climate and how it hangs together with research integrity. And then I'll dwell on the methods that we applied during my PhD thesis. We conducted a large survey and also focus groups. And then as to results, I selectively survey some findings. So here I'll focus on perceptions of academic research in Amsterdam pertaining to the research climate, as well as research misbehaviors. And then I'll talk a little bit about particular characteristics they ascribe to a good research climate and interventions, how we could get to that good research climate. I'll close with a small discussion, and hopefully that should give us plenty of time for Q&A. Now, I talk about research climate, but there's a fair chance you've heard of a different term, namely research culture. And here I just put up 3 codes of conduct that have already featured some of the talks of today, where all of them seem to emphasize this necessity of institutions or of researchers collectively to foster this culture of research integrity, or a culture where research integrity can prevail. And you may wonder, why is that? Why is it the case that this cultural component has become so important? And if we go back a little bit in history, initially when we start to talk about problems of research integrity, the focus was often on the individual researcher that engaged in research misconduct, so the bad apple, if you will. But over time, it has become apparent that the organization that individuals work in plays a very large role in influencing their behavior and in giving them an indication as to what is the behavior they should engage in and what they should not do. And in relation to this, the particular definition of a research climate that I use, and I'm drawing on work from Schneider et al., is that it refers to the shared meaning that organizational members attach to the events, policies, practices, and procedures they experience, and the behaviors they see rewarded, supported, and expected. And it's important here that if you juxtapose that to culture, that culture pertains more to the values and the norms that may drive or that may be the drivers behind some of these policies and practices or behind particular behaviors. So maybe we can even, by studying the climate, get a little bit more insight into the culture in academia. Now, how does this relate to research integrity? And here it is the idea that if you work in a climate that you perceive to be fair, if you perceive that your organization treats you fairly, the policies are fair, the idea is you're more likely to trust your organization and abide by their sort of decisions and, behave all properly. But the reverse is also true. And here it is sort of stipulated that in an organizational research climate where the perceived injustice is very high, that research might be more likely to engage in questionable research practices or perhaps even research misconduct. And when we started this work back in 2017, there was already some evidence, mostly quantitative evidence, on the relation between the research climate and research integrity. So we knew, for example, that in a research climate where competition and suspicion among peers prevails, that it is there that researchers were more likely to report research misbehaviours. But we also knew that in research climates where researchers were actively socialised into responsible research practices, they tended to report less research misbehaviour. And this is important for us today as well, there were already some indications that this research climate may not be one gigantic thing, but that your perceptions of that climate may differ depending on where you stand. And it was this that prompted my supervisor to apply for funding, and as Yuri already alluded to, that's been called the ARCA project. So again, it consists of 2 studies and also 2 pilot interventions I won't dwell on today, but I'm happy to take any questions should you have them. Now, for this survey, we invited all of the academic researchers in Amsterdam, and at least those that were working in research for a day per week. And we sent them a survey questionnaire that consists of different instruments. And I'll first focus on the Survey of Organizational Research Climate, or the SORS. And the SORS inquires people's perceptions of the organizational research climate on a departmental and on an institutional level. And you can see it as an instrument that inquires people's perceptions of particular policies and practices and procedures at their institution. And we wondered, do researchers, especially if they come from different academic ranks, do they experience this research integrity climate differently? And what you'll see on the next slide is that you'll see the results from the SORS, and the most important thing for you to remember is that the higher the bar, the more positive people's perceptions were of the research climate for integrity. And I'll focus on differences between ranks. Now, this is the pattern. And as you can see, the dark blue pertains to PhD students, the sort of pine tree green pertains to the middle group, the postdocs and assistant professors, and the light green is the associate and full professors. And if you just sort of look at this image for a little bit more, you might see some patterns. That is that on many of these different subscales, it is the associate and the full professors that seem to express the most positive views. And I want to draw your attention to 2 particular ones, the first being integrity socialization. So this subscale inquired the extent to which people were actively socialized into research integrity practices when they entered a department, when they joined a new field or a new group. And this is presumably something that senior scientists would be in charge of, and they seem to be saying, oh, we're doing fairly well, whereas the folks that would have to be socialised, namely the postdocs, the PhD students, the assistant professors, seem to have a little bit less of a positive view. And something of a similar picture emerges here, where it is actually the PhD students that say that they perceive quite a lot of integrity inhibiting factors. So it's them that see more suspicion and secrecy and competition among colleagues. Now, so far I've talked mostly about the perception of practices, procedures and policies, but I think if you remember my definition from one of the first slides, it's also about what sort of behaviours that we see around us that shape what we find normal. So this made us interested in what sort of research misbehaviours did people perceive around them. And for this, we used a list of 60 major and minor research misbehaviours. And I know that may be a fuzzy category, but major would be the typical falsification and fabrication items, whereas minor might be a behaviour like not asking someone for permission for their name to be mentioned in the acknowledgements. And here we were interested to know which of these 60 research misbehaviours would people find most detrimental? And this is how we did that. So participants of our survey got presented 20 randomly drawn research misbehaviours, akin to how you are seeing it on the screen now. And then we asked them 2 questions. The first being, how often did you observe this? And their answers could range from never to once or twice to maybe even 3 times or more. And then we also asked them, if you were to observe this, how bad is it? How large would the impact be on the validity of the findings? And we used both of these questions in our answers because we reasoned that, sure, we want to know what's most detrimental, but maybe then we only learn about things that never happen or only happen once. But we also don't want to focus on things that happen a lot, but that people seem to find very trivial. So we combined those in what you'll see on the next few slides. And what is very important here is, although I'm going to show you the top 5 of most detrimental research misbehaviours, across sort of all academic ranks, disciplinary fields. Here we lumped them all together. We also did we stratified some of these analyses, but this one was always ranked highest across academic ranks and disciplinary fields. And apparently throughout Amsterdam, this was something that people seemed to be concerned about, the insufficient supervision or mentoring of PhD students and junior co-workers. And then the rest of the items on these lists can be seen as, questionable research practices or maybe sloppy science. And here we saw some differences between fields and between academic ranks. But at least it became evident that besides insufficient supervision, researchers care or are concerned about questionable research practices around them. Now, knowing about what sort of misbehaviours do people perceive, what's their perception of the policies within their institutions, we wanted to integrate these findings together, and also the degree of perceived publication pressure that we investigated, although I didn't talk about that just now. And we wanted to know of these sort of different factors pertaining to the individual, to the climate around them, to maybe more the system of science, like the publication pressure they may experience. To what extent can those factors actually explain variance in research misbehavior that people perceive around them? And in this sort of distinction, I'm drawing on work also from Sovacool, for example, in 2008, where very often if we talk about factors that may give us insight on how we can prevent or how we can explain research misbehavior, we seem to distinguish three different levels. So one being more personal factors. So here you can think of the personality traits, for example, that some of you mentioned. And in our case, that was the academic rank, the disciplinary field, and the gender of the researcher. And then there's a sort of middle level, namely the climate factors. For this, we used a survey of organizational research climate. And then there is the more systemic factors. And here we use the publication pressure questionnaire as a proxy. And of course, there are many more factors that we did not include. And also, these sort of three different levels are arguably very, very complex and may mutually reinforce one another. But these are our results. And what you see here is if we added these different groups of factors, what percentage of variance could they explain? So you can see that the individual factors, remember the rank or the field, only explain about 7%. People's perceptions of policies and practices, the climate factors, seem to go for about 22%, and the perceived publication pressure is about 16%. And then, of course, we wanted to know, okay, can we put them together? What happens? Do they reinforce each other? And here you can see that if you add the individual factors and the climate factors, you get to about 32% of variance that's explained in frequently perceived research misbehavior. And then you add publication pressure, and you can see that it's only about 34%. And then you may wonder, is that really a significant improvement? Should we care about this? And the brief answer is yes. If you compare the model fit, which we did by contrasting the -2 log likelihood ratios, you can see that it is a significant increase in model fit here. So it does make sense if you want to explain research misbehaviors that are frequently perceived to also consider publication factors. Now, we can do the same thing on the frequency times impact scores that I presented to you earlier, and then you get something like this. So it's a little bit lower, because now, of course, both the importance and the frequency are taken into account, but you can still see that our sort of best model fit here would explain about 18%, adding in all the factors. So what you saw on the last slide, what I want you to take with you most is that the climate factors seem to play the highest role. Maybe not the most important role, but at least within the factors that we sampled, they played a fairly substantial role. And this made us think about, what would a responsible research climate then look like? What would that entail? What sort of characteristics would people ascribe to it? How can we get there? What's standing in the way? And for this, we conducted focus groups. We invited researchers from the VU University and also the Amsterdam University Medical Center. And as I said, we wanted to know the key characteristics of a responsible research climate. If they would go to bed at night and the next morning they would wake up in a responsible research climate, how would they know? What sort of things would stand out to them? And we also wanted to know, I'll focus here at least, on the particular interventions that would help alleviate some barriers that are in the way of getting to this responsible research climate. And we used a focus group methodology, and maybe it's important to know that typically a moderator here leads the discussion. We also always had an observer that could look at the group dynamics, that could take additional notes. And in the results I'm going to present, we used inductive content analysis, and it's important for you to note that we really focused and we used that definition of the research climate that I presented to you earlier. So I focus on behaviours, policies and practices that people alluded to. And we interviewed researchers from across different disciplinary fields, the biomedical sciences, the natural sciences, social behavioural sciences, and also the humanities. And here you can see the overview of the different researchers that we interviewed, a total of 61. We conducted 12 focus groups, and you can also see that we conducted focus groups for different academic ranks in the hope that people would feel invited to speak more freely if they were among their peers. Now, the first characteristic that came up very often was fair evaluation. And here people said that they didn't just want to be evaluated by citation and by impact factors, and that they thought the Institute should have good and sound policies for talent development, and that evaluation should also be tailored to the researcher, to their strengths. It shouldn't just be a system where everyone has to tick all the boxes. And here I put up a quote from an assistant professor that confide with us how incredibly annoyed she is by the fact you constantly have to excel in everything. And she thinks it would be much better if you could actually, pick a topic that you'd be really good at and excel on that part, or maybe do average across all. But in the current system, she finds it keeps on getting more and more and more things where she has to tick the box, and there seem to be zero priorities. Now, another common characteristic was openness, and participants really used this as an umbrella term. So it referred to talking about open research practices, openness to collaboration. But something also very important here was openness between colleagues and daring to tell each other if you had sort of concerns, and creating an atmosphere of openness, if you will. And here one associate professor emphasizes the feeling that you feel invited to discuss with others, and you also know that if you raise something, and you think if someone's doing something slightly wrong or different, that you can raise it and the person won't feel personally attacked, and that there is an environment where people know we're all trying our best and we can work it out. I'm only saying this to help you, and that hopefully we can continue to do better. Now, another thing, and maybe a little bit related to what Tom was saying earlier about the effect of work pressure, is the need to have sufficient time. And many researchers remark that if all of your time is cut, that this can really hamper the quality of your work. And that good quality work, to sit down and write, that takes time. And this is also what an assistant professor from the humanities said. It means having the time to think and write, and also the ability to protect that time so it's not sort of eaten up by teaching or clinical duties or administrative duties. Then, of course, integrity pervaded many of our discussions unexpectedly. And here it's important that people understood integrity to come about in, for example, departmental leaders, not just encouraging their staff to develop their scientific competencies, but also invite them to further attune their moral compass. And in a very practical sense, it was put by this professor in the natural sciences that said, if you approach your research with integrity, and I think you know where this quote is from, you have to be the first to doubt your own research results. And another topic that was very often mentioned was trust. And of course, in current interdisciplinary international research, trust is really crucial. And our participants emphasize that trust doesn't just mean, sitting back and expecting everyone to do well. It also means actively holding each other accountable. But they really thought this was very important. And it also means that, especially if you work in these sort of larger teams, that you can both, trust the ones above you and the ones working below you, that they're doing what they're doing for good reasons. And finally, freedom. Almost academic freedom was talked about. And here it also meant that people were free to disagree with the existing scientific paradigm, and there was a freedom to engage in discussion. And another thing that people remarked that they wanted freedom in is in a choice of topics, because if you worked in an area for so long, you have a view in what can really be a potential for improvement or something that will lead to success. Now, they alluded to a few different interventions that could help us to get a little bit closer to a research climate with all of the characteristics I just described. And the first one was improving support. And this could include giving formal research time, trying to decrease the administrative burden, and developing these policies for sound talent development. And when it came to talent development and promotion, especially the senior researchers also remarked that it meant that in another way of supporting, granting them some autonomy back, it meant that they would have to be actively involved again in making decisions on whom to hire and whom to promote. And you don't just do that based on these external criteria like impact factors or obtained funding, because you know who within your department would be capable of doing a particular thing, and you get that trust and that authority. Then there was the fact of discussing expectations. And we need to be transparent also about expectations regarding so when we work, what we expect from others, what we expect from our supervisors, our supervisees. And participants also meant this very practically in discussing just mere availability, and it's really had to involve PhD students as well. And one assistant professor had a very good example here where she remarked that she had colleagues that were very conscious about when they were sending emails. And even if they worked on the weekend, they wouldn't email their PhD candidates or students on the weekend because they didn't want to get that message across. And then various researchers talked about improving supervision, and some of the researchers in the biomedical sciences also mentioned that it may be helpful to have like a discipline-specific manual that would list the exact duties of a supervisor. And here I'm showing you a little bit of a cheeky conversation between PhD students and biomedical scientists that were aware that there were courses for these principal investigators to become better supervisors, but that many of them say, at least they say, they don't have the time. And then these people remark, let's just make it compulsory. If you don't pass it, just simply don't get to supervise. Now, rounding off, I should first stress that there are some factors that I've explicitly not considered. And one of them is the bad apples. So, for example, I didn't talk about trait theory, where it's the idea that a narcissistic or a Machiavellistic personality may sort of predispose a person to engage in research misbehavior. And I also want to highlight two major limitations of the work. So first, the response rate on the survey differed between 17 and 15%. People stop halfway. And this, of course, may limit the generalizability of our findings, and it also makes us question, you know, are the answers of the respondents we had, are they also would they be similar to the answers of people that didn't take part? And we tried to compare our population with the demographics we could find on the academic population in Amsterdam, and it seemed to give some reassuring picture, but you can never completely know. And the other thing is that if you really want to know how a climate works and what it is like, then asking people about their perceptions may not give you the best answer. In fact, it may be much more informative if you become the fly on the wall and if you actually go in person to observe that climate, because only then you'll really see what sort of behaviours people engage in. And if we look forward in the field of research integrity, and especially focusing on research climate, there are two things that I think are worthy of our attention. And the first is it might be helpful to get a little bit more conceptual consensus on what we mean when we talk about constructs often studied in relation to research integrity. And that can hopefully also help us to learn more from one another, because we know we're talking about the same thing. And another thing is that also influenced our choice of studying the research climate is that you hope by focusing on these tangible policies and behaviours that you'll be able to design something like interventions that can then change those policies or nudge particular behaviours. And here I'm seeing a risk, because we might keep on developing a lot of beautiful pilot interventions that work very well on self-selected and enthusiastic populations, but where we have very little clue as to whether they would work better than practice as usual. And I think here we really have to look and buckle up to apply very rigorous designs to evaluating some of these interventions that are currently rolled out. Now, I want to close in telling you that often when I talk about changing the research climate, people find that hard. and they feel like the pull of the system of science is it's just taking them down. It's too much. They can't take it, and they think that science is doomed anyways. And it is my strong belief that researchers that work in a responsible research climate might be that critical bit more resilient to the tide, and they might be able to better navigate the stormy seas of this great thing called science. And I want to close with saying this was not all my work. I've had the privilege for the last 4 years to work together with wonderful researchers both inside and outside of Amsterdam. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Tamarinde, for this very nice and highlighting presentation about research climate. I think we learned a lot about what it is exactly and some things that we can do. It's a discussion that we have gone through for 4 years, and what exactly the difference is between culture and climate. And I think we specifically focus on climate. Maybe it's good for the audience to, if you can just give us some ideas about what are the differences and similarities.
So I think that at least often when people talk about organizational culture, they think about particular norms and values that may be present in that organization. But the thing with norms and values is it's not really easy to see or catch them. They're sort of the drivers of the behavior, but they may be forever invisible to us, and people may not even be able to explicitly verbalize them, and yet they drive behaviors. And I think that the policies, the practices, the procedures that we see institutions apply are in some way like loose translations of those policies, but applied to practice. And the same is that the sort of behaviors that people may observe and that they may consider that this is the expected behavior, that may ultimately be driven by particular values, but A, the people that are engaging in that behavior may not even think that is the case, and B, the behavior may be standing in a very loose relationship to that. So it's my understanding that if we study the behaviors, practices, and policies of an organization, it might give us some insight into that even more fuzzy concept called culture.
No, that's a beautiful answer. Thank you very much. There's a lot of questions already coming in from the audience, so I'm going to the first one. So the question is from Madi Khalili. So she says, according to Tamarinde, research integrity concerns behaviors. So it seems that it should include behaviors regarding the physical health of researchers too, because researchers are responsible for their own bodies. But this subject is rarely discussed. My experience as a PhD candidate who will defend soon is that working seriously on a PhD thesis is harmful to physical health. The wrist and back aches are the result of my hard working during the PhD. According to researchers in general and PhD candidates in particular should learn to work in a health-friendly manner. However, this may not be possible because of our lifestyles. We researchers should sit a lot, type a lot, all have negative effects on our body. So, what do you think of this specific element of being a PhD student?
So I think it's a very interesting remark, and it relates a little bit to the discussion that we had with our focus group participants about discussing expectations. And this also regards, discussing expectations for availability, but it could actually also regard discussing expectations for how you work or how you would like to work or how you would like to structure your life. Maybe you're very much of a night owl and you're very productive late in the evening so that during the day you can go for a nice run. Or maybe you and your team, when pandemic measures allow for this, can meet in person and can go for a walk instead of, maybe talking through a screen. So, but I think it's a very, very relevant point, especially in relation to the findings that have been discussed yesterday with PhD students having higher burnout rates and having higher rates of mental health issues. So I do think it may be a way, or it may be time for us to think a little bit more about how do we want to structure our physical environments, not just our environments in terms of maybe policies, practices that are much more sort of invisible things, but how we may want to structure our physical environments in science so to let people produce the best work. And here I'm tempted to look a little bit at the sort of big tech companies that I think for recent years have done a lot of investment in creating environments where people feel engaged and productive. And at least on this issue, I am personally inclined to think we might be able to learn bits and pieces from them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the points that you pointed out in as what can we do as intervention is support. You called it support, but this can also be support, and not only that the facilities should be there, but that you have a department that facilitates that you going for a run, for example, after lunch, if you go to the gym for an hour just to relax, to cope with your after dinner dip. I mean, those are perfect measures to stay fit, stay physically healthy, and that you at least feel the freedom to make these decisions. So the next question is also very interesting. So Alison Harbin asks, I'm particularly interested in the difference between culture and climate. As you mentioned, there are the bad apples who seem to poison the well for all of us. My research suggests that it is the toxic culture of scarcity, competition, and a rigid hierarchy inadvertently supports and protects these bad apples. What do you think can be done from a systemic level to change culture? This seems to me to be the most important question and perhaps the key to protecting research integrity.
I think it is indeed a very important question. I'll be the first to single out that I haven't explicitly studied research integrity from a systemic point of view, but to some extent, I'm willing to think with her. So if we think creatively about what sort of systemic things would have to change that would also then influence the culture, and it might make that culture much less inviting for these bad apples, because that seems to be the thing that she is referring to. And I think one of the things that we're already currently seeing is the movement of team science and team evaluation, team-based evaluation, I should say. And I think that is one of the ways in which we're currently trying to set up systems that would really acknowledge teams for their work. And I feel like if we were to formalize that a little bit more, that would also, on a more local level, lead to a sort of less inviting environment for the bad apples that we perhaps have in mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, on a critical note, so you also make the analogy for not only the apple, but the apple is in a boil with different apples together. That would be the team. And one of the thoughts is that if you have one bad apple, that the other apples get infected as well. Would that be the case in team science then?
I think it could definitely be a risk in team science. I don't think it would be necessarily the case. And what I would like to, remark back is that maybe we don't yet know enough about bad apples. And a lot of what we're saying rests on the presupposition that people want a bad apple, forever a bad apple. And that's actually an idea I would like to challenge also in relation to some of the whistleblower talks we've had before. Some people may be bad apples, and there may be crazy people, as Lex said, for forever. Some people may be bad apples, as Alice was saying, because the system fosters bad apples. And if we shift the system around, they may not be so bad after all.
Okay, that's indeed a very valid point. I was also wondering, of course, I'm a co-author on one of those papers as well, but I was wondering, you have, and we have discussed this before, you have this 34% of variance, right, from the proxies of individual climate and system. What do you think of the rest of the percentage, the 66%?
So I think a couple of very obvious things are not in there. The first one that comes to mind is the way we have to acquire funding. I think that's a very large driver of behavior. We also talked about that yesterday during the panel, what funders can do, or what funders encourage, or what funders require a mandate can have a very direct influence on what people do. So funding is the first one that comes to mind. And we also didn't sort of explicitly inquire the exact evaluation or promotion criteria that people were held against. And I also feel like that's a very, very large one. So those are just two of the random things. And another thing, of course, that I already mentioned is the whole personality of the people. And maybe you, as a sort of psychiatrist, can say even more informative things about that. Mm.
Well, yeah, personality is a very interesting thing. I think it has a lot of influence on climate, on supervision as well. It can be very great for supervision, but it can also have very negative consequences. It's also about credit, about giving credit, about sharing the credit that you give for the work that you do together. So of course, there's not a lot of research on personality, but we do know that certain character traits are associated with research misbehaviors, and they affect a lot. And one of the things that we have organized in this superb supervision course was this role modeling, right? That we put a lot of emphasis on role modeling, and I think role modeling is essential there. And the bad apples are not the good role models, of course. You need the good apples that can infect other good apples, that create other good apples. So I think it's understudied, but it's also highly difficult to measure, because it's also a question, and that's a question in psychology and in psychiatry as well. Is it nature or nurture? Is let's say, the narcissistic or the Machiavellianistic leader, is that someone that was born that way, or is the system helping someone to develop these personality skills? And I think this is really difficult to answer, but this should be an important question, because are we creating these personalities ourselves with this highly competitive system, or are those people born that way? So, well, hopefully there will be possibilities to do some research on that, although it will be very difficult. There's another question coming in from Nicolai Bijleveld. What do you think about the relation between research integrity and financial integrity, social security? They do not directly relate to science practice. However, they do influence academic culture and therefore research climate. Would you therefore advocate a more integrated approach to fostering integrity, not only focusing on research integrity?
It's an interesting one, because it relates even to your previous point that within this very big scarcity of finances that that we have partially perhaps created, or we've seen it being created, that may foster behavior that strongly undermines research integrity. So it could be, that would be my sort of short answer. It could be the case, but I'm not really certain if I already see the sort of integrated approach there. So that would have to give that a little bit more thought. But I definitely can see the sort of financial disbalance that we see in many areas of science at least feed in or contribute to some of the research misbehavior. So perhaps some of the other factors would also include this sort of financial instability, particularly if it relates to job instability.
Yeah. That's a very fair point. And what do you think then of the skills that you teach in the superb supervision course, about not only the hard skills, the research integrity skills, but also the soft skills? Do you consider them also some sort of integrity skills?
I do, at least to some extent. Let me say that I think that they can help facilitate behaving with integrity, and they can also help us, all of us, in discussing this precarious thing called research integrity. I have once read, and this relates to research ethics, but I think it also applies to research integrity, that people say talking about these sort of things, really with your own team, is related to, or is very similar to talking with your children about sex, because it quickly gets intensely personal and people feel very affected and people feel awkward. And I think it is those sort of interpersonal skills of, knowing when giving feedback is right, knowing when it's a good time to apply coaching techniques, really being able to listen, that they can help us to have constructive conversations about these really tricky, sensitive topics.
Yeah. So you need, like we discussed yesterday, is that you need them towards research integrity. That you need those skills as a means to get there. There's one more question, and that's related to the results of the survey. Did you find, but also from the focus group, did you find major differences between the different disciplinary fields in your study?
To some extent, we did. So when it pertains to perceptions measured by the Survey of Organisational Research Climate of the fairness of the departmental expectations in terms of publishing and obtaining funding, we saw that the humanities, researchers in the humanities, thought these expectations they got from their department were a lot more unfair than researchers from other academic fields. And as I already alluded to before, the specific misbehaviours that people ranked as most detrimental did differ a little bit when it came to disciplinary field. But very often, I'll also stress, they're in the direction of the expected. So researchers within the humanities, again, didn't seem to be too concerned about publishing a study with negative results. But that is more or less in line with what you would expect from the start.
Yeah. So those are the major differences that you found.
We of course found some more, but I'm especially, and this pertains to the survey results. When it comes to focus group results, it's perhaps good that I emphasise here again that what I presented there is results from all academic ranks and disciplinary fields lumped together. And certainly there were sometimes like small differences as to what people then understood. You know, if we talked about time, then it was researchers in the humanities that complained about, yeah, but my time is overshadowed by so much teaching. And of course, it was research from the biomedical sciences that said, yeah, but, you know, my clinical duties always go first. But they both saw that their research time was eaten up. Yeah. And yeah, so I guess that many of those differences were along the line of the expected. So I think that the results that I presented here are at least informative things for all of us to think about, regardless of our field.
Yeah. So one final question before we go to the panel discussion: if you just received a $2 million grant, or €1 million grant, of course, that's a bit more, and what would be your next step in studying research climate?
I would really like to scale up the evaluation of pilot project, and I think for that we need a lot of very intensive resources to do that effectively. And I would look at the extent to which we can effectively measure whether supervision qualities have improved. And I would really like to further test those sort of programs to hopefully scale them up and create a new generation of PhD students where the chances that they got a very responsible mentor are at least significantly higher than they're right now.
Well, that's I think that's a beautiful end of our discussion. Thank you very much for your talk, for all the things that we have discussed. I think it's a very interesting and very important subject, research climate, and it's affecting us all. We do not always see it, but you made it. It made us aware that research climate is really affecting us, and and that in some instances it should be changed. So thank you very much again. Please, a warm round of applause by the whole audience. Yes, great. So now we go to the final part of our discussion. So I would like to welcome all the speakers that are here live on stage. We have the panel discussion, and we also have the online speakers as well. So Maura, great to see you again. Ton, also very welcome. And Julia, I think you're there, but you just became. There you are back again. That's good. Good to see you. So what we're going to do, we have a Mentimeter. Again, a poll, we have 3 questions, and what we're going to do, we're going to discuss these questions with the panelists. So I suggest that we start with the first question, and that is, what is the best way for institutions and funders to influence responsible behavior of researchers? And there are 4 categories. The one is compliance with rules and regulations. The second one is by codes of conduct. By C is demanding training, and 4 is safeguarding supervision.
Can they only choose one?
These poll results are always... Sorry?
You can only choose one?
Only one.
Yeah, you can choose only one. So it's about...
It's a tricky one.
Yeah. We're just waiting for the audience to fill in the Mentimeter. It's always a bit of a hassle to go there. and to fill in the code. But now, maybe it's also influenced by the less talk. That could be. But I'm very happy to discuss these first results. So Natalie, what do you think?
I think it's cool that you made them choose just one. Yeah. So my answer would be that the best way to make institutions influence responsible behavior of researchers is to have a multi-level approach, from policies through structures and roles and training. So I refuse to choose a category because it has to be a multi-level approach.
So I cannot entice you to choose only one.
No, and I say that because the stakeholders that we interviewed to develop the embassy really emphasized that you need to have the policies, but you need to have people who are responsible for the action plans to make sure the policies happen, and you have to make sure that there's training at every single level, that the structures need to be in place, that the tools have to be available. So I can't choose just one.
Okay, so then I'm going to look for someone who wants to choose. Well, Lex is raising his hand.
I'm willing to choose, and I'm willing to go with the wisdom of the crowd. And to the former speaker, I would say, yes, all are important. Yes, they need to reinforce each other. But maybe, like Tamarinde explained, the variance is explained most by the supervision, I believe. Supervision is key. That is still the rhythm of the scientific education, the research education. That is important. It's important that these people are trained, they're monitored, they're never alone, never alone. 2 is the least size of a supervision team, never alone, that's risky. And there might be consequences. So a license to supervise that can be withdrawn, temporary or permanently, that I'm really in favor of that. So yes, I agree with you, but I agree with the crowd as well. Supervision, if I want to pick one, that's the one.
So I would like, thank you very much, Lex. Now I would like to go to Julia and after that Mariette, because they coordinate both projects on training, of course. So I'm happy to hear their thoughts. Julia, you go first.
Yeah, it's a good question for me, and I think everybody expects that I go for training, but I have to take it a bit into brackets because training, as I said in my talk, only makes sense in an environment where research integrity is already fostered. We have studies which show that there is actually there can be a negative effect of training research integrity. So, of course, I still follow the ideal educational perspective that we can change people through training. And I do think it's a really good way to go, especially when we think about the ratio of supervisors and students and what is actually in our institutions. I do think we still need training.
Okay, thank you very much. Mariette?
Yeah, what I'd like to add is that I really like that this choice that the collective has made with regards to supervision is the more personal approach. And I think that's also really relevant. So opening up the discussions, becoming more transparent on issues of integrity. Of course, regulations are always highly relevant, but as an applied ethicist, I know many codes of conduct actually end up in drawers. No one ever knows the content of these codes, and they can become more vivid if you actually start discussing these issues. So I think it's a wise choice of the people who have been voting to actually vote for the 4th one, even though it's a tricky one. I already said you cannot choose but just one, yeah. But I would support it fully. And I know that you and your project are also, and the Virtue project, are also focusing on supervision and mentoring, and that's also in Julia's project and in mine. So I think we all agree on that, actually.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Just if you want to say something, and I talk to the panelists, just raise your hand and I will get to you as soon as possible. So Ton, any thoughts on this one? Yeah, you're raising your hand.
Yes. I would like to add something to it. If you look to all the cases I had to deal with, then you see that often the problem is a matter of questionable research practice, and especially when it comes to statistical analysis. So a lot of things can be a lot of progress you can gain working on training on methodological expertise in the group, and also that people become aware of their limits of this expertise and work together with people who are experts in, for example, statistical analysis. So, and I say this because I think that questionable research practice is much a bigger problem than breach of research integrity. Mm-hmm. And therefore put emphasis on methodological training and also that make people, and that can be done by training the supervisors, for example, or whatever. But that is what I would like to add to what has been said.
Yeah, so a combination between training and supervision, which always, well, a lot of times, oftentimes it goes hand in hand. I see a Maura, go ahead.
So I would also agree with both Natalie and Lex in that this is a systems-wide, it's a systemic sort of conundrum, if you like. But when I think about training, it's not just about training in a methodology or doing, a 2-hour course or a 1-day course or a 2-week course, whatever, in, ethics and integrity. I think we need, and it isn't something that is common in most academic disciplines, is the idea of continuous professional development. Because, the methodologies you're using today or were using 2 years ago may not actually be the right methodologies anymore. The approach to a particular ethical issue, the thinking on that may have moved on. You may actually be dealing with something for which there isn't a great deal of thinking available. So I think it's not just about once-off training. This is all very much about continuous professional development of the students, of their supervisors, of the supervisors, of everybody in the system, which is very common in medicine, for example, but really hasn't been taken up as an idea in the academic community more broadly, I suppose, because academia, being an academic, is not seen in some ways, especially if you're a very junior academic, as a profession. So I think there's some work to do there as well.
Yeah, and that also alludes to the talk from Julia, that she is advocating for courses on being a researcher. I mean, then that's also something a duty from a supervisor, but it's also something a duty from training. So great. Tamarinde, you have some final thoughts as a supervision expert?
Well, I actually wanted to draw attention to the fact that the item included both supervision and collaboration. And I think I'll reiterate the point about team science and the point about how good it is if you can work in a team, akin to Lex was saying, never let it just be one, let it be a group of people, let there be collective responsibility to be mindful about, the questionable research practices that Ton alluded to. So I think that's another way in which our crowd is very wise. Yeah.
Okay, nice answer. Okay, so we have heard all the panelists for today. So let's go to the second poll, please. If you can start the second poll, the Mentimeter. That's about assessment criteria for funders and institutions for promotion, tenure, or even grant allocation. And I'm very curious what you would say. What would be the most the best assessment criterion? Is it the use of open science practices? Is it the journal impact factor and scientific output? Is it collaborative skills, or is it the narrative CV? And I'm very happy to hear your thoughts from the audience first. So we wait to come in some to see the results. A very interesting poll, I guess. I hope, I mean. So who wants to start here to discuss it? We have several experts in our panel, so I don't see any hands yet. Mariette, you're smiling, so now you can start.
A question to the audience, actually. Maybe someone would like to address why use of open science practices scores so high. That surprises me. Even it's now on top. Yeah.
Yeah. That would be your question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe the answer can be.
I'm again with the wisdom of the crowds, I should say. Open science practices is basically about transparency. And transparency is key and core to me. It enables a lot. It enables you to check what happened completely. It enables you to reuse what happened. It enables you to check whether someone did what he or she promised, going to the later publications. Many of these questionable research practices can be unmasked when they occur by open science practices, open codes, open methods, open data, open everything. That is important, and these together build trustworthiness. So transparency and trustworthiness are key to me, and open science practices. It's not completely a magic bullet, but it's coming close.
Yeah. Who wants to respond on this? Yes, Maura, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Lex. Now, I do think that there are other things that we can do, and I think that the introduction of the narrative CV, especially for individual targeted funding, for example, is a really important part of the assessment process. I don't think it could ever be the full assessment process, but I think that showing willingness to be open in your science, if you like, and in your research, and showing willingness to work with others, to share your data, to actually publish your results, be they negative or positive, by the way. I mean, I think negative is just as important as positive here. All of those things, I think, speak about your approach to science and your approach to being a researcher, which Julia mentioned. There is no silver bullet, but it's certainly, I think that putting an emphasis in assessment on that element of how you behave as a researcher says a great deal about you.
Yeah, okay, nice. Julia, any thoughts?
I can give you my first thought when I saw the 4 choices. I thought, okay, I would pick the narrative. Because you can include all the others in the narrative, because it's difficult for me to decide. I go with Lex, of course. Open data or open sources are important. Are getting more and more important, but not all disciplines are as far as others, and in some disciplines, actually, it's more difficult to do so. So. Yes, there are pros and cons for all. And I think this narrative, in the sense of, okay, I demonstrate who I am and what I do with the criteria of transparency, impact on research and impact on society would be my way to go.
I think this is a very smart answer because you can include journal impact factors, scientific output, collaborative skills, and open science practices in your narrative CV. I mean, that's perfectly fine. Like, you can do that, and you can show that you are that you're doing all those things. Tamarinde is first, and then Tom.
Yeah. So I also think that, as Maura and Lex have stressed, that open science practices are important. I want to draw attention to the fact, and I think Julia already alluded to this, that we have ideas about open science practices in some fields. And often when we talk about this thing called open science, if you will, we have some sort of prototypic fields in mind and some prototypic ways of doing research. And in the recent years, we've seen scholars also from the sort of more qualitative side and from the humanities engaging more and more in these debates. But before we all are here going to advocate that this is the best way of assessing, I would like to see a little bit more of that engagement.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Nice answer. Ton, you wanted to add to the discussion?
It's just because of a few practical things. Open science, I think that by the end, this is the most important way to assess the work of people, how they are involved in this development. But there are some infrastructural requirements still there. And not all universities can afford themselves to work on all the equipment that is needed, all the procedures that are needed to come to open science. The editors have to work on it, so that will take a few years, maybe a decade or maybe more. So for the moment, I would say. Let's stick to the narrative CV and let's strive forward to more open science. But this and therefore the institutional obligations are very important here.
Yeah. Wow, this is already a change, right? 10 years ago, we only were bean counting, and now we hardly discuss scientific output anymore. It's not, well, of course it's relevant, but it's not mentioned by the panelists. Natalie, do you have some final thoughts?
I'm going to be devil's advocate.
Okay, you go scientific output.
Well, I was actually going to say the narrative CV for all of the reasons that Julia said, but in the narrative CV, it's most important to describe why you're a good researcher, that you choose the right questions, that you make an impact to society or whatever domain that you're working in. And that does include scientific output. So it's what do we...
Raised it by one.
Raised it by one. 2 went up when Lex was speaking, so I haven't done such a good job.
Okay. So Lex, your final remark before we go to the next one.
Yeah, well, I liked many of the remarks that made and agreed to most of it, especially what you said, Tamarinde, that we need to develop open science a little bit more for all disciplines to be able to apply it. To me, that is the same to narrative review. It's a wonderful idea, but there is some research being done out there, and people who are using narrative CVs to judge grant applications or vacancy fulfillment, they say, wow, this is difficult. All these stories carry me away, but how can I judge them? What is the measure stick I need to use? Yeah. And there may be a talented person, wonderful in spinning his own life story, getting the job, and someone else, less skilled in spinning his or her life story, not getting the job. I'm a bit worried by that. Yeah. So I'm not completely against bean counting. The beans need to be there as well as a kind of reality check.
But isn't that the case for each of these criteria to assess? There will always be people who are more and better skilled in presenting themselves, getting published in the right journals, being able to tell your narrative. So that's always the case.
Yeah, but the additional thing is the yardstick you're going to use. Yeah. It reintroduces subjectivity. And decades ago, we started bean counting because we wanted to get rid of subjectivity in these processes.
Yeah. So the conclusion I take there is that we need multidimensional approaches for assessing researchers.
I can live with that, but then you can start a story about how to weight the different elements.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay.
Laura wanted to respond, I believe.
Oh,
saw her hand.
Thanks.
Or maybe she was yawning. I don't know.
Go ahead, Laura.
I mean, and I think I said this morning, but I suppose all I wanted to say is that, you know, we're still trying to figure out how to do narrative CVs. So, you know, you don't just, you know, it clearly isn't good enough to say, write me a 3-page essay. You know, it's not like a US college application. Where you think, oh, you know, I have to have been involved in charity work, and I have to have shown I've done this, that, and the other. So, I mean, the narrative, I suppose the narrative CV in and of itself needs to be structured so that there are different elements, I suppose, of the research the research question, the previous experience around kind of delivering on research, and so on and so forth. And those need to be evidenced where possible. So you can't just make wild claims about things you've done. You have to be able to evidence that. And I think that's where actually open science is a big help, because you can point to, for example, where you have shared data or where you have published in open science platforms, or where you have encouraged open science practices among your peers, and so on and so forth. So I think, as I say, we're still trying to figure out how best to do the narrative CV, A, for the researchers, but B, for the peer reviewers, the evaluators. And I absolutely agree, Lex. The feedback we have gotten from our peer reviewers is that they love the idea, but that it's really hard work and it's really difficult. And they've suggested ways in which it might be easier for them in terms of guidelines on what to look out for. So I think this is a work in progress, but it's an important piece of work in progress.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this remark, Maura. I would like to go to the final poll that we have that we have right now, and that's about something that Tamarinde already slightly alluded to in her talk about researchers committing research misconduct, and then should they get a second chance in academia? So
Question
please.
is more open, isn't it?
What?
Being accused, it says.
Yeah, being accused should get a second chance. Well, being accused and being convicted would be a better...
found guilty as well.
Found guilty, yeah. Good point, thanks.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow, it's not consensus.
No, there's no consensus, which is good. So, who would like to start off? Anyone?
Good question for Ton.
Sorry?
I think it's a good question for Ton.
Yeah, so Ton, you can start. What do you think?
Depends on the breach of the norm, but I would say if it's a serious breach of for example, norm of not fabricating and not manipulating, then it's over and out. And that has to do with the trust of the institution. That in criminal law, you always have a second, third, fourth chance to live as a normal citizen. At least in our cultures. But in the academic institution, this is all about professionalism and trust. And if people have breached the norm, that is an important norm for the researcher, I think it's over and out. And it's a pity that they can do other work. And I can give example of it. There was a serious breach of research conduct of a professor, medical doctor, and it came then by the end. There was this medical doctor professor came himself to the conclusion that he could continue as a medical doctor still, but not as a researcher.
Yes. Okay, so yeah, that's indeed a fair point. That it's not something that it depends on the case, of course, and it depends on the severity. Tamarinde?
Yeah, I think it connects nicely to what Ton was saying. So I think, Ton, you mentioned that in criminal law, people get a second, a third, and a fourth chance to re-enter society. And I think that sort of last part is really crucial here, because as we've heard today, the trial or the accusation or the finding someone guilty does not just happen in the institution, it also happens in the media. And I think what we've seen with some people is that their case has been blown up so much that their chances of still being able to participate as a normal citizen are pretty much screwed. And I do agree with Tom that, you know, if someone's been found guilty of, say, fabrication or falsification, then that person can no longer perhaps work in academia, but can still work as a medical doctor. And apparently this person could. But I think we're facing a challenge that by being, or by some of these cases already going to the general public and the media so early on, that becomes more and more of a rare thing, I'm afraid. And I don't know if I find that fair.
Yeah. So you suggest that Diederik Stapel should get a second chance in academia?
I wasn't referring particularly to academia, but I was going to continue on what Ton was saying of getting at least a second chance in society. And I believe if we're talking about the case of Stapel, that was a really difficult thing to do just about anything. And that is still a waste. Yeah. I really believe that.
Yeah.
Maybe to add and to extend a bit the criminal law situation, if somebody has been convicted of a serious crime, that can have impact on his future labor position. For example, if it's about a position in which trust is very important, for example, somebody has beaten up a person, it will be on his list, and it will be very difficult to become a teacher at a school for a long period. And that is because he is no longer trustworthy to people. Yeah. And that is the same for a researcher, I think. So I have no problems with that.
Yeah, so good comparison. Yeah. Lex, you want to...
Yeah, well, I agree with Ton and also with Tamarinde. To me, there are two things here. One is that it depends on whether one is a multiple offender, how severe the offense was, and also what the career stage was. You should allow more among early career researchers than among established professors, of course. That is one point. So that depends on these things. And the second thing is, for instance, when I have committed financial fraud as a bank employee, it sounds rather reasonable not to re-employ me as a bank employee, but maybe I can still be a taxi driver. And so you should not ban everyone from all professions, but such a person might still be a good doctor or a good teacher or a good, I don't know, taxi driver again, but maybe not trust the people again with research, which is important. It's quite easy to make faults and to cover up faults. So I wouldn't hire such a person, a senior one, a multiple offender, who has really committed something seriously. Yeah. But it's all gradual, of course.
Yeah, that's a good addition indeed. About the career stage of the researcher, that is also dependent. Is there also someone who should decide on this?
Well, that's really a good point, and maybe Ton can speak on that as well. Some countries have laws on research integrity. We don't, and I don't believe we should, but some countries have laws, and some countries put people behind a bar in a jail for research integrity offenses. We don't. And I believe that is best because people might get away with big offenses. I don't mind that much, but it opens the discussion and it makes finding questionable research practice so much more easy when there is not the threat of a kind of criminal law behind it.
Yeah, yeah. And Natalie, do you think that virtue ethics do help there?
Well, in terms of virtue ethics, I think if somebody is actually committing research misconduct, they're probably not a very virtuous person anyway. So virtue ethics training is probably not going to help them very much. But I think I go with the crowd that I'm not sure in terms of this question, because I don't think giving someone no second chances really helps when we say that we want an error culture, we want to be really open, we want people to talk about their mistakes. If people fear that their mistakes or their errors might be interpreted as research misconduct, and then that's it for their research career, I don't think that's particularly helpful. And I find it strange that you can be banned from practicing medicine for a number of years, or you can be banned from competing in athletics if you are doping for a number of years, and then you can come back and be rehabilitated. But you can't be rehabilitated as a researcher. I find that, why do we hold ourselves to such high standards?
Yeah, that's a very good point that you're raising here, yeah. Yeah, you're nodding.
I don't have much
Mariette.
to add, actually. It's a very itchy topic, so I also agree with the crowd that I'm not sure, and especially if it said accused, as it said in the beginning. Then I also, in the break, I had a discussion about the retraction watch, which I sometimes find a bit difficult that all these names and pictures are being presented because people are named and shamed. And Ton also said a bit about the protection of people who are being accused. And at some point, you do have to say, well, if you are convicted, if it's true that you have been conducting misconduct and you have been punished, shouldn't there be something like, and especially if it impacts you much in society, we can easily say you can always become a taxi driver, but I think Diederik Stapel has very few options, actually. So it impacts you in a way that you can no longer flourish as a human being, and it doesn't only affect you as an academic. So how far should that reach, and how far should that stretch? And I find it really, really difficult.
Yeah, and that's also a good addition. If I remember it correctly, did Diederik Stapel actually work as a taxi driver? I think he did.
He did,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So it is a coincidence.
But not long.
No. But it is at least that profession is possible. Great discussion. Thank you so much for having this very interesting discussion on several topics. I really would like to thank you to be so interactive with us. Also would like to thank the online crowd. Maura, thank you so much. Julia and Ton, thank you so much for also attending the panel discussion. And of course, I would like to thank you as the audience that being here. It was a long day, of course, but I think it was a very interesting day that we had with a lot of good interaction, with a lot of good discussions about several topics. And the good news is that it's not the end yet. For today it is the end, but tomorrow we have a third day of the summer seminar, and then we're going to talk about the role of the journals and the role of peer review. So that's going to be another interesting topic related to responsible conduct of research. So I'd really like to invite you to join us tomorrow as well under the chair of Jeroen de Ridder, which you saw this morning. Before we are closing and ending the live stream, I would really like to thank a couple of people. First of all, Iris, the moderator, the online moderator. She's waving at us right now. We cannot see her, but thank you so much. Very helpful to have those questions selected and arrive there at the iPad. Thank you so much. Pakhuis de Zwijger, thank you so much for organizing this virtual event so nicely. You're not there yet, so you have to work hard tomorrow still, but thanks in advance. And of course, two very important persons that are not on the floor here, but those are Samira and Doreen. Samira from the Abraham Kuyper Center, who is partially organizing this event, and Doreen from the Netherlands Research Integrity Network, also organizing this event. They worked really hard, specifically in the last couple of weeks. We put a lot of effort to make this day a success. Without them, it would be impossible to have organized this so well. So a big applause for them. And one final remark, we're going to send out a survey for the second day to evaluate the event that we want to learn, that we want to improve for a potential next summer seminar on research integrity. So please fill that in, you will get that in your inbox, I think by the end of, after a couple of hours when the meeting has ended. So please fill that in. And for now, thanks again so much for your attention and for all the good interaction that we had. And we hope to see you tomorrow.